Okay guys, so I have decided to do a video to clarify all of this disinfo I still see being shared about Saturn is evil and is connected to Satan and the black cube, and that this is what Muslims and Jews are secretly worshipping. Now, I had thought that this psyop had died a natural death back in 2012, along with the Illuminati controls the entire planet stuff. But it seems that this is not the case, because lately I have still got people sending me their videos about all of this Saturn is Satan disinfo. So what I am going to do now in this video is do what these people do not do. And that is, I'm actually going to use the esoteric knowledge to show what the symbolism of Saturn, the black cube, and Satan actually pertains to. Now, firstly, Saturn has nothing to do with Satan. Satan is a state of consciousness that mankind fall into in the lower degrees of the cycle in the Iron Age, when he has forgotten his true nature and he is ignorant to who he really is, and therefore he is mentally and consciously trapped in a physical understanding of himself and the reality in which he lives. Now, this quote from Manly P. Hall explains it perfectly. When the mysteries were celebrated in ancient Egypt, there was an evil spirit called Typhon, or Set, who brought about the death of the good Osiris. It is the red Set that has given us our concept of the devil. But Set was nothing but the material world, the ground of man's temptation, and also the environment in which he gains his immortality through self-discipline. Therefore, Set, or Satan, is divine opportunity, the world into which we come in ignorance, but from which we depart in wisdom. So, as we can see by this quote from Manly P. Hall, Satan is a state of consciousness. Saturn is actually symbolic for the timing of the ether and its ebbs and flows of the great year cycle. This is why we can also see him represented in the symbolism with the hourglass. He is also not representing anything evil. In fact, he represents the ridding of evil on the physical plane at the end of the Iron Age, and the bringing of wisdom and enlightenment in the new Golden Age. This is why he carries the sickle, because it represents the removal of the tars, otherwise known as the souls who contain no light. This is also relayed in a quote from the French alchemist Fulcanelli, and he goes on to say, "The age of iron has no other seal than that of death. Its hieroglyph is the skeleton, bearing the attributes of Saturn, the empty hourglass, symbol of time run out." So this is in relation to the souls who have taken an easy path of indulgence and self-gratification, and they will not be rewarded for their behaviours. So I guess to the people who have behaved in this unconscious way, they could see Saturn as something negative. But for the soul who has actually stayed the course and not wavered from their path back to God and their divine nature, then the return of Saturn is something to be celebrated. This is also why there were festivals in the Bronze Age dedicated to Saturn. The Greeks called it Chronia, as Saturn was represented by Kronos to them, and the ancient Romans called their festival Saturnalia. It was a time to celebrate the Golden Age that Saturn brought back with the return of the ether, and the Christ light, otherwise known as Christ consciousness. During these festivals dedicated to Saturn, they would put on plays for each other and celebrate with feasts and dancing, and the higher classes of society would swap roles with the workers, and all would be seen as equal for a day. Now this was because in the Golden Age there was no labour and everybody was equal. It was a time of great abundance on the planet where the enlightenment of all mankind is celebrated and encouraged. However, because Saturn is also symbolic as the timekeeper of the great year, he also represents when the ether and the Christ consciousness wanes as we descend through the lower degrees of the ages. And this is shown in the symbolism of Saturn clipping the wings of Cupid. As for the relation of Saturn to the black cube, this is nothing more than a fallacy, because I can find no evidence of this in any text. The black cube actually represents the void from which all spirit and matter is manifested. You can see the number 0 in the same way. It is symbolizing the potential of a soul prior to creation. The symbolism of the cube actually represents the number 6, which is the number of the physical body and the physical plane. The cube also folds out into a cross, which represents the divine race within mankind, which all mortals are materially manifested through. If there is any number that represents Saturn, it is the number 13, which symbolizes death of the physical form. And in the case of souls with no light at the end of the great year, it also represents the second death of the soul too. The relation to 6 in the hexagram seen on Saturn's poles can be attributed to the differing degrees of physicality we experience on the material plane, due to the waxing and waning of the ether. The reason that the Muslims practice idol worship around the black cube, known as the Kaaba, is because they have been just as misled by the false interpretations of their holy book as the Christians have been. The 5 pillars of Islam, which states that they must attend the Hajj every year, is only a hadith. It is not mentioned anywhere in the Quran. In fact, ostentatious prayer and worship of idols is actually warned against in the Quran. And Muhammad also warned them that Islam would become corrupted. He went on to say that a time would come when nothing would remain of Islam but its name, nothing of the Quran but its word, and that many mosques would be splendidly furnished but destitute of guidance. He said that in the latter days the true spiritual essence of Islam would be lost, and religion, for the most part, would be reduced to a ritualistic compulsion, and that the clergy would be corrupt and a source of strife. The Kaaba, in which they all circle and pray, has nothing to do with Saturn. It contains a black stone which they all pass by and touch. Now this stone is actually just a piece of meteorite. Now the reason that the ancients saw the meteorite as sacred is because it contains iron, and iron symbolizes the anchor of the gods to the physical plane. It is the one common thread linking all mortals to the divine man. In the writings of Plutarch, he related that iron is the bone or core of the gods, and in Tibet, meteors were known as sky iron, and were considered the supreme substance for forging iron weapons, because the iron had been tempered by the gods on its passage through the heavens. Now, in 1938 and 1939, during Hitler's expeditions to Tibet, in his search for evidence of the divine man, also known as the Aryan race, he uncovered a statue of a Buddha-like representation of Jesus, and it was made of meteorite. So again, we can see this connection of meteorite iron to the divine nature within mankind. So this is what the Muslims have been fooled to worship, a meteorite stone that symbolizes nothing more than the link between the gods and man. However, as with all the religions, their teachings have been corrupted, and their scriptures have been misinterpreted. But such is the folly of mortal man in the age of iron. He seeks to be told truth instead of searching it out for himself, and as such, he follows the path to oblivion provided to him by the Antichrist. So as you can see, there is nothing in any of the esoteric knowledge that supports this belief of Saturn being related to Satan, the black cube, or anything evil. This is merely a psyop created by the Antichrist and pushed by their shills and the ignorant to keep people in fear of knowledge relating to Saturn and away from the truth. Now, I know this information about the end of the cycle and the accountability of our souls is not welcomed by many. Most people would rather entertain the modern New Age beliefs of everybody is special and all is love, instead of the truth that every human has a responsibility for their soul, which was gifted to them by their Creator. The path back to ourselves and our true divine nature was never meant to be an easy one, but therein lies the test of a soul's worthiness also. We all have the opportunity now to take a path back to the light, but it means we have to let go of these false beliefs that sound good and embrace truth and all the responsibilities that come with that. Now, this verse from the Gospel of Buddha says it the best. Men go astray because they think that delusion is better than truth. Rather than truth, they follow error, which is pleasant to look at in the beginning, but in the end causes anxiety, tribulation, and misery. Well, I will leave it here for now, guys, and I'll put all of the relevant links in the description underneath. And as always, peace out.